Go. Welcome, everyone. Thank you, Washington County Democrats, for hosting this interview with Democratic gubernatorial candidate Casey Kulla. Casey is a Yamhill County Commissioner elected in 2018, and he is a farmer and a scientist who went to college in Washington State and grew up in Lincoln City. Casey, welcome to Washington County.
Thank you so much. We were going to do you introduce me and then I do a bio, but you hit all the high points.
Well, is there anything else you'd like to include in that?
Well, I could fill in some of the details, right? So like I grew up as a surfer. I mean, that's an important detail to me, at least. I would say that my life has been completely surrounded and consumed by water. So like that's the thing that just the through line. We're vegetable farmers and we were cannabis farmers for a number of years. And so we settled on Grand Island, which is a river island in the Willamette, specifically because we were surrounded by water. Awesome. Figured that if we're going to be farming in the Willamette Valley, we needed to be in the largest body of water. And even my work, while I was going to undergraduate and getting my biochemistry degree, I was working in our plumbing shop at the university, pulling toilets and repairing steam lines. So even then it was like, here's the water thing. And that's my only opportunity to work in a union shop too. Yeah. We work a lot with the unions as county commissioners, but that was my time seeing how important the worker protections were that unions advocated for. It was really clear to me I would have a lot more asbestos in my system if it wasn't for them.
I think a lot of workers would.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that the first question, since we're talking to Democrats with Democrats, would be, why are you a Democrat?
I'm a Democrat because I really believe, and I've seen time and again, that our state, our cities, our counties, and our federal government have a role to play in making sure that everybody is safe and healthy, right? That's like the fundamental, for me, the basis is that for me, Democrats look out for people and work to make sure that their lives are better, and they recognize that together we do it better.
Okay.
And I didn't look at the question before, and I've never thought about it before. But isn't that weird? Like it's not
something. It's not something we ask every candidate. When they're running for office. Especially nonpartisan debates and stuff. Well, why are you Republican? Why are you Democrat? Why are you a Green Party person? It's something that we distinctly know in our minds why we are that way, but we never explain it to people.
Totally. And I find myself, so I work with two very conservative folks. I actually don't know their party affiliation, but in my role as county commissioner. And so many of our disagreements will ultimately come down to that, where I know that public health has a role in making people's lives safer and healthier. I know that our road department has a role in making people's lives safer and healthier. And so we get into those a lot of our fundamental conflicts are around that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is the Roger Mudd question that every candidate should be able to answer. Why are you running for governor?
Back in this last year, so we had two failed legislative sessions, and we successfully had one this year, and it was very exciting that we just got through the session. But as you and I probably both see, there are so many divisions in our community. We've seen with COVID how things that could have brought us together tore us apart. And I believe that wedges were pounded in to places to drive people into different camps where they may never have thought about it before, about the difference between wearing a mask or not. But then as we got closer to the election in November, and then as I watched intimately getting the emails of people threatening violence at the state capitol and then at the federal capitol, political violence, I realized that my work here in the county, both as a farmer, building community through food, and as a county commissioner, building community across differences to just get stuff done, that above all, we needed somebody to bring us together. across differences, and to build relationships where maybe there weren't before. An example of that in our community is that in 2018, well, shortly after I took office in January 2019, I started talking with people right off the bat of like, how can we address homelessness? How can we get people safely off the street? And I soon discovered that there were different camps. There were different people who had different ideas, and they were worried about turf. They were worried about scarcity, even, but that there was only a limited pot of money, and that was gonna, if my work took some of it, then your work wouldn't have enough for it. And so I really built relationships. And then over the course of the year, we've kept them up. And when the pandemic hit, we were all ready to get people housed in motels using FEMA dollars, so that people were not safe, because they were not safe on the street. And so the relationship building over time that leads to good outcomes for people in the community is why I'm running right now. And some of the things that we really, really need to address, in my view, are climate action, reducing inequity, and really reducing the risk of political violence. And that's really where, like, I spend every day working on that.
So you sort of started into the next question. What do you think is, out of those three that you mentioned, perhaps the most important one that the 2022 election is going to be about?
Yeah, I do think that I should say that we, as you know, we increasingly see political disagreements turn into political violence. And I think that it has one of the greatest immediate risks to our community, but people's lives, due to racial inequity, class inequity, poverty, are also at risk. But as you have seen and I have seen with the heat storm that we've had recently, with the ice storms, with the wildfires, there are things that are stressors and chronic stressors, and then there's existential threats to our ability to live in this beautiful place. And that's really my view, is that if we don't address climate change in a really just and fair manner, that we are going to live in a place that's simply inhospitable to us. But what I believe is that if we adequately address climate change on all levels, right? So in our community, in our neighborhood, with our friends and our neighbors, in that mutual support, but also at the city level, the county level, the state level, and the federal level, we can actually address political violence and racial and just other disparities and equities. So really, that's the thing that I think we should be talking about and addressing.
So in relation to this, because climate change has been one of the issues that Republicans in the legislature have walked out over in recent sessions. This question comes from a Washington County Democrat in Rock Creek named Maureen, is how can we advance policy goals like climate change without while avoiding the walkouts, essentially?
That's like the best. I would say thank you, Maureen, is really like the best question, because we do have the ability to address it in very creative ways that are really true to communities. Coming from the county, I see a lot of solutions as being, so what I see in our state, and when I listen to other people and just look with my own eyes, I see us having, believe it or not, a lot of the same problems. Like Lake County, one of their biggest challenges is homelessness. And it's because of mental health crisis. Like that sounds like, it sounds like inner Portland, to be honest. So they have the same problem, but the solution is going to look different in every community. And so what I would say for Maureen is that if we can talk about solutions being unique to the community for a shared problem, we can really get somewhere. So one of the things that we can do to model kind of what Kitzhaber did with the watershed councils and with the early learning hubs, there's a lot of different things that Kitzhaber did where it was local solutions to local problems with state framework. Is that I would like to see what I'm calling, it's not a very interesting name, but a resiliency council, a resiliency core, where within each community, within each county, you essentially set up a group, and it doesn't have to be a new organization, but essentially the state directs funding for work that's climate related that people can do in a local manner with local staff that's true to their community. So in some communities, that might be being really aggressive about trimming trees along power lines because PG is not, it maybe is, or Pacific Power is not keeping up with it. And maybe that doesn't really look like carbon capture or sequestration or mitigation, but it's really adapting to the realities in our community now. So to me, that's climate action in a particular location that's true to their values.
I mean, it just goes to that idea that the urban-rural divide is probably more a media construct than it is like an actual thing, because the issues you're talking about, climate change, homelessness, mental health, healthcare, I mean, that's all stuff that affects all of us. It's just how, you're right, how we go about solving it is going to be different for different communities.
And I do want to, I agree, Carl. I do want to admit that, or like put out there that when we talk about things that are important and crises or threats to our communities, but that people seem to believe is targeting them. So I'll just say like farmers and foresters. Yeah. If we don't acknowledge their concerns and listen to them and work with them and build relationships with them, we will continue to have divides over things that could bring us together. One of the things that I work peripherally with the governor on lots of things. Governor's staff is very responsive to things when I have questions. But what I really do think is that the governor needs to be, as well as being the executive, needs to be like the great listener in chief, the person who is going out into communities and really hearing from community leaders and then able to show them exactly how the governor has responded to that particular concern. And it goes a long way. I know it's hokey, but sometimes people literally just want to be heard.
Mm-hmm. And in that whole vein of being heard, as a governor, you'd have to work a lot with the legislature, and they hear from a lot of different people. What are your experiences working with the Oregon legislature?
Yeah, so I've testified and worked with folks on as early as 2000. So I'm relatively young, but 2009, we started working on gravel quarry and aggregate siting on farmland in the state. And then I worked on GMO seed crops in Southern Oregon. And we've done a lot of work in the farming and natural resource and outdoor recreation community. So we know people. In marijuana advocacy as well. So I'm a licensed cannabis producer as well. And the inability for farmers to bank with a state legal crop is really dangerous to their welfare, and it's really bad for their business. But so those going up to stepping into office led me to really start building relationships with individual legislators. So we're at the point where across the political spectrum, I can talk to people, they reach out to me, they respect what I have to say to them, and we work just do that behind the scenes work that you do all that time you never see it until you get to the vote, and then you're like, the work paid off, even if it's not testimony in front of a House committee or something. Yeah. So I feel like the strength of relationship was exemplified when we saw the 59-1 vote to expel Representative Neerman, which was a somber undertaking, and I'm really grateful that everybody acknowledged that the somberness, the gravity of the situation. I know that some people were were already predisposed to not like Mike Neerman because of his values and his decisions and his words over the years, which has been damaging to many people and harmful. But I really appreciated that legislators, I maintained open lines of communication with them, and that they were, to a person, were like, this is an important and a somber and a necessary thing to do. And we shouldn't celebrate it, but we should acknowledge that what we did was right.
Yeah.
And then sometimes that you just don't get what you want, and it's so frustrating. But I've lived so many different lives and had so many different experiences in the world that I'm not quick to judge. So when when a legislator is like, I'm gonna let this bill die, I'm frustrated, but I know that it's the long game, that we have to be persistent upon the things that are right.
I mean, it can take a decade for a bill that we all think, should be a shoo-in to get through the system.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. I would acknowledge that one legislator said, please don't run because I don't want to see you ground up and spit out. And I really gave her a virtual hug in our phone call, because I appreciate that care and concern.
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's talk a little bit about, your metrics for running, because it's unusual for a county commissioner to take the leap and run for governor. We've only had about, I think, 2 Democrats who were county commissioners in the last 20 years take on this gargantuan task of organizing a statewide campaign.
Yeah.
Why is it time for a county commissioner, a local government person, to lead the state?
Yeah, so Carl, in my view, at least in my role as county commissioner, what we do is I bring people together around difficult topics, and I hear everybody out, keep them calm, and from that we bring forward the solutions that are right for the community. And to have if you're not coming out of a county, you're most likely coming out of the legislature running for governor. And the legislators typically think of solutions as being solutions that are legislative. If that makes sense. Your lens is your range of universal solutions is generally limited by your range of experience and who you know, right? I mean, that's just kind of the fact of the matter. But working out here in farmland directly with people who really hate my guts but still value I'm used to this, but who know that we have to work together to get things done, really makes it so that I see the universe of solutions, from the very smallest to the very largest scale, and from the least costly to the most costly, on all the timelines. And I feel like this is the moment when we need that. We need the person who can see the range of issues and isn't scared by taking them on. Like water. I mean, I'd say that with climate change being an existential crisis in our communities right now, it's harming our most vulnerable. We also have, as part of that, we've got water issues in every community in the state and every region right now. And some of them we don't know about because we don't hear them on the news. And then some of them are persistent and don't seem to be getting anywhere, like the Warm Springs water crisis. Drinking water in Warm Springs needs to be a bigger issue than it really is right now. It's a huge issue. People are driving bottled water into the Warm Springs, but we've got communities on the coast who are struggling to have clean water or have any water because of logging in their watershed right now. Doing things like figuring out how to purchase and protect those watersheds is so vital, and it's at a big scale. But people are like, oh, I don't know, do we want to talk about water? I'm like, let's talk about water because we have to. That was a long answer. Sorry, Carl.
Well, it was a good answer though. Who are some of the folks that you see as your political base in this campaign?
Well, I really see, especially for the Democratic nomination, I really see a lot of community-based organizations, conservation organizations, racial equity groups, queer communities as being the base, folks who have such important issues that we need to address, who don't feel like they're being addressed either at the legislature or by the governor's office. So it's really the disaffected but politically engaged and passionate and effective people in our community. Like one of the groups that I've worked with over the past legislative session is the accessible transportation community. So folks who represent pedestrians and people in wheelchairs and bicycle groups to try to update the bike bill, which was 50 years ago. The bike bill was passed and dedicated 1% of funds to bicycle and pedestrian safe routes. And that program urgently needs to be updated for a new era, for accessibility, but also for climate action. And there's so many passionate people around that, and those are people who are near and dear to my heart, because they represent so many different areas where we can make improvements.
Yeah. So different groups of people are going to be influencing the upcoming election. We had a question from Lindsay in Tigard, and she wanted to know, since you're a rural county commissioner, what do you think of Timber Unity, and have you seen them in your county?
What's Lindsay was her name?
Lindsay,
I'll say
yes.
that Lindsay's question is, again, an excellent one, just like Maureen's. So yes, and if you haven't read it yet, High Country News has an excellent investigative report by Leah Sotilli about the influence of Timber Unity in a proposed trail that I have fought for over the years, on an old railroad bed from the cities of Yamhill to Carlton. And it was actually from the Washington County line. So this is something that should be near and dear to your hearts here in Washington County. Is it would have connected Washington County trail networks all the way down to the city of McMinnville. And folks associated with Timber Unity, for sure, quickly identified that as an issue that they could make a wedge out of. Like a
sort of like a NIMBYism,
like guns and abortion as being,
yeah.
Well, for sure, a NIMBYism, but also just like an issue that they could push on really hard. That was like a rural issue, a rural versus urban, or a newcomer versus old timer issue, where it didn't need to be, and it actually isn't an issue like that, but it was created. It was like a manufactured issue. So we have seen that in our community, but also, I testified in support of both of the cap and trades as Timber Unity was, building presence and building energy and intimidation, to be frank, in the halls of the Capitol. I do want to say that, so Timber Unity has been effective. We've seen that. I get along very, very poorly, I'll say, with Andrew Miller at Simpson Lumber. I should say that he hates my guts, as I think is the answer. And he swears that he's not involved, and I'll just leave it at that. He swears he's not involved. But I want to say that what I have seen is that Timber Unity has touched a nerve in communities. Now, they may not be true to those communities, but it's touched a nerve, and people feel like somebody is speaking for them. And if people don't feel heard and feel like somebody is speaking for them, they're going to continue to hold allegiance to that group or that organization or that voice. But it doesn't have to be, one of the great myths of rural or Western Oregon, I'll say, because we're not really rural. I mean, I'm 7 miles from Dayton, which is a town of 2,000, but I'm 15 miles north of Salem. So, but one of those great myths that's been propagated over and over again, to the point where people just believe it, is the idea that logging on federal lands caused a great devastation and a loss of jobs in rural logging communities. And it's just factually not correct, but it's been held and told over and over again until the point where it's believed to be completely true. And we see this with the Big Lie, but before that, we saw it with the Mueller report at the federal level. What you say it over and over again, and you just believe it. And we absolutely need to have a counter narrative, and we have to have a vision for rural and urban Oregon that includes everybody. Because the same people who are like Timber Unity all the way, they speak for me, have other issues in their heart that they care about. Like, they care about their kids having a good education and having a pathway to the future. There are things that really we can shape the narrative. And I mean, I would love to be part of that work. I talk a lot about public lands and the value of public lands in our community. I mean, I grew up literally on the beach, right? Like I spent 4 hours a day in high school surfing and it was all free, right? Because Tom McCall walked across that beach and he pounded that stake into the ground and he swore at the people at like the beach resort, and the helicopters were flying, and I got to partake of that like statewide treasure. And one of the things that people across Oregon do love is public lands, and being able to access public lands ranks really high on that list of like livability issues. You know, people might not be like, oh yeah, climate change is the greatest issue facing me, but if they think about like, dang, what could I really use right now is like a little bit better access to public lands. The Willamette River is shockingly poor access right now.
Yeah.
So many of our state and our federal lands are behind gates on private land. Like we can do better, and we can also build a story about our future that includes people who are completely disaffected. So while the organization I am pretty horrified by, I know that they tapped into something that's true and important for people in their hearts. And good question, Lindsay.
Some good insight. Going back to sort of the campaign a little bit more, where do you see like the discussion for 2022 fitting into the national, like here in Oregon, where do we fit into the national conversation?
Well, we definitely fit into it. If we're going to have any kind of true infrastructure package that really addresses major issues of infrastructure in our communities, and if we're talking about the range of infrastructure should include broadband or internet, decent internet in communities that people can afford, it also needs to address things like safe, accessible, affordable childcare. Those are two issues that are huge in our communities, and I've convinced my colleagues to invest in, which I'm very proud of with the federal dollars, the first round of federal dollars that we had. But so I see our role in both in the 2022 election and going forward as to being a champion for true accessible voting, because this is obviously part of the big lie, is the result of it is that we're seeing issues of voter suppression, right? So championing our way of doing voting that's accessible to as many people as possible in a way that's auditable. You know, our county clerk is continually, he's a Republican, he's continually reminding us of how safe and auditable our systems are, just to, like, destroying that big lie every day. Yeah. But then we can be the leaders in some of this, the creativity and aggressive addressing of climate change, like really aggressively addressing it in a way that's true to the community. So those are the things that I see us is talking about infrastructure in an expansive way. I mean, I talk about that all the time with Congresswoman Bonamici, and then really aggressive climate change in a way that's true to communities. And one of the things, you know, we talk, the cap and trade bill was a great example of the worst of Republicans' fears and maybe the hopes of Democrats, the greatest hopes of Democrats. But in and of itself, it was incomplete. Yeah. And water, like I talked about water, but having the federal government agree that water is a major issue, and then helping fund projects that will increase efficiency and also do water retention on the landscape would be huge. And this is stuff we can't afford on our own. So it really has to be a strong connection, which my connection with our Congresswoman is very tight. So I look forward to strengthening that even more. And I've been doing a series, you know, once we couldn't meet in person when the pandemic started, it was really clear to me that there was an urgent need for credible, accurate, and timely information from people that others trusted. So I started putting together, it started out as bi-weekly, and now we're just once a week, but we still do it, where we live stream mayors, city councilors, business leaders, the leaders of community-based organizations, and then generally the field staff, but often senators and congresspeople and legislators will join on. And we talk about, for a while, it was just really focus on things like COVID. And then we started broadening it because, the federal bills broadened for us. And so we really built the relationships from the newly elected city council and school board member all the way up to the US Senator. And I know that we can keep doing that at the bigger scale.
Okay. Well, I think
that was a long answer again.
Yeah. Let's do one more question about your governing philosophy. And this question comes from Carol in Tualatin. And she wants to know, how do we proactively manage our state government to avoid the meltdowns we've seen recently in the unemployment department or the rollout of the Affordable Care Act?
Oh my gosh, what's the name of the person?
Carol.
Who asked the question?
Yep.
Carol. Okay, Carol, awesome question. So as you and as I know, we've had disasters in the state government. And one of the things that I really know that we need to do is we need to be talking and listening to line employees, like the folks who are delivering the services in each department, to really find out from them, what are your biggest concerns? What are the things that are hitting you hardest? And what are the things that bureaucratically are slowing you down in really, serving your mission? Because a lot of line employees are so dedicated to serving the community with the mission of their agencies. And the things that they have to work with are often the stumbling blocks for them. But so that's one of them. The other one is that we have woefully underinvested in our IT infrastructure in state agencies. And then we see that time and again, how we're attempting to work with 1 million people at a time with a lack of investment in up-to-date IT, right? So the ability to work with people through, cloud-based methods, or the ability to actually talk to somebody on the phone when you're having a problem. So I think we really need to renew and refocus our efforts on actually serving people with each department and agency that we have. Another thing that's a little bit more on the wonky side is that I think we need to reconsider the relationship between Oregon DOJ and our other state agencies. And what I mean by that is that right now, when a state agency has an issue, they're constitutionally required to go to DOJ for their legal advice. But ultimately, DOJ is here to represent the statutes, the rules, and the people of Oregon, and not necessarily the department. But because they act as their legal counsel, all of their conversations are attorney-client privileged. So it takes a long time for the information about a problem to come out into the public view. Part of that is that billable hours, state agencies do billable hours DOJ, which means that each state agency comes to look at DOJ as their attorney rather than the attorney. And so I think we need to do both some administrative rule changes and also some cultural changes to recognize that agencies really work for the people, just like DOJ works. So there's some things we can change quick, and some things that are going to take a while, and some things that are cultural changes, and cultural changes are always the slowest.
Okay. Thank you for that answer. So we're going to end with two questions.
Thank you for asking the
sort
question.
of take them on a more personal track before we end here. Who would you consider your political mentors?
Carl, I didn't hear.
You still there?
Yeah, I didn't hear your question though.
Who do you consider your political mentors?
Well, so the person I would say who I think about their work the most often is Tom McCall. And that's just really like that both of us have that strong connection to nature, and a real concern for the long-term health of people in our communities. So anytime I can get a piece of information on how he governed or how he made decisions, I pull it into my life. I'd say that at the local level, or here in the state in the present, I've learned from a lot of different people, and at the same time, I'm on the cusp of Gen X and millennials,
Mm-hmm.
and so I think the Gen X in me doesn't tend to believe everybody and trusts nobody, and so my mentorship networks are vast, but I also always take a little bit of a grain of salt. I'm like, okay, I hear what you're saying right now, and then I'm gonna go to somebody else and ask them too. And so it's broad, from the executive director of Association of Oregon Counties to the Metro Council president. Our people, the president of the Mayor's Association, are all folks that I talk to all the time, and I try to learn from, while knowing that that's not the complete answer.
Awesome. Well, the last question is, what's an interesting fact about yourself that voters or anyone in general would be surprised to learn?
Oh my gosh. I'm an open book. So hopefully they just figure out everything on their own and they're not surprised by it. I would say though that sometimes I feel like birth order counts more than it should. And so I'm the youngest in my family. And I feel like in that role, I've always pushed. And some people are like, no, you can't do that. And I'm like, yeah, I can. So that it breeds this independence and persistence, and that gets me to the goal kind of no matter what, but it feels like it's all based on birth order.
I'm
the youngest child.
Washington County Democrats, this has been a look at our first candidate for the Democratic nomination for governor with Yamhill County Commissioner Casey Kulla. I hope you've enjoyed it, and we are going to include, when we post this interview, links to his website and anything else he'd like to share with us that we can take you to online. But Casey, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for asking me, Carl. It's really been a pleasure talking with you, especially so that we're not just Twitter friends.
Yeah.
Yeah, and stay safe out there, everybody.
You too.